offer a few observations. Protecting the God-given life of an unborn baby is not political, it's biblical. Protecting our borders from criminals who'll steal from us, assault our loved ones, and poison our citizens is not political, it's biblical. Protecting women and children from being trafficked for sexual slavery is not political, it is biblical.
All right, let me jump in on this, right? All that's political. And the fact that he's saying the Secretary of Defense, the United States of America, and it is the Secretary of Defense, because by statute, it's the Department of Defense. No matter how horny Pete is, makes him look like a tough guy. It's the Department of Defense. What's really political in that video, which was from the National Religious Broadcast Association speech, several things about that. Number one, the Secretary of Defense is a political appointment to the United States government. He's an official United States government representing over 2 million military service members and DoD employees who should be bound by the Constitution, okay, bound by the First Amendment. And no, he's not. He is talking about his Christian faith and how that mattered more than anything else. None of the three things he mentions is the mission of the Department of Defense. Okay? But this is what Pete spends his time doing. This is what I have videos this week. I'm not going to show him. He did we'll talk about it. But here's why I'm hot in the collar about this. And later I'll tell you about how it relates to the rest of our show. What the hell does this have to do with his day job? Pete Hegseth spends more time focusing on things that have nothing to do with the defense of this nation and shaping that defense and building a strong defense and working with allies and frankly conducting our wars, if we're being honest, between workout videos, which there's a million of, and I'm not gonna make you watch those, to religious conferences. Here it is. And here's where it gets really, really bloody for me as a retired Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Army, who was an official spokesman of the United States Army before I retired. This is a perfect example. Now, I did a screenshot of where this is. This is the Defense Video Information Service, DVIDS. This is the official military video distribution system, Defense Video Information Distribution System, DVIDS. That's Pete Hegseth with his personal pastor, extremist Doug Wilson, who we talked about in the show last year with one of our guests, one of the most extremist religious leaders in the country, does not believe women should have the right to vote. And Pete Hegseth hosted him on February 17th in the official Pentagon Theater, which was broadcast over official channels and video recorded and distributed the official channels. That video at the beginning of this show with Pete Hegseth speaking, that was distributed on official DoD channels. Department of Defense channels distributed his speech at a religious conference. Now, why does it make me hot in the car? Because this is happening too. Just today, we find out that for the second time, airspace in El Paso was shot down because Department of Defense, Pentagon assets shot down a drone that was owned by Customs and Border Protection, thinking it was an enemy or something, okay? A CB. That while civilian aircraft were in the region, they used this with no coordination between the two agencies who are baking our protection. So while Pete Hegseth is speaking about the biblical role of protecting our borders, his own people are jacking it up because he's too busy talking at religious conferences. And what else is going on? I don't know if you guys heard. This is crazy, but they're trying to start a war with Iran. Hundreds of aircraft in the Middle East, ships off the Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, across the region. There's rumors and Trump threatening to attack Iran, a very, very powerful nation that's much larger than Iraq, okay, for perspective, folks. And what's Pete Hegseth doing? This is my favorite part. It's going to make your head hurt the most. This was his priority this week. Pete Hegseth did a 7-minute video this week, 7 minutes in his office, talking about the Scouts. It used to be called the Boy Scouts. Now it's called Scouting America and their initiatives. They threatened to pull support of scouting because of DEI. And And scouting gave it. See, for those who don't understand why that's a big deal, scouting, the Boy Scouts, they have summer camps. Often those are hosted at military installations by service members. Often National Guardsmen will make that part of their summer training. They'll host a camp. A lot of military facilities and land is used by Scouting America to do these camps and train them. So there is a big part of the military support for scouting that is, and probably adds up to a lot of money, to be honest with you guys. And the good reason is because it's a recruiting opportunity, right? Hey, Boy Scouts love America. Boy Scouts would be, or, Scouts would make Girl Scouts too. Scouts would make great soldiers someday or service members. So there's a natural relationship there for future recruiting to have them. Well, Pete Hegseth decided his priority wasn't war with Iran. It wasn't coordinating with other agencies. It wasn't doing his actual job between lifting weights and holding prayer services. No, he decided that his biggest priority was attacking scouting. And they came to agreement. This just came in the news today, you guys, as I was getting ready to, literally as I was getting ready to shoot the show, the news broke that the changes that Scouting America agreed to is that going to include the removal of DEI-focused language for Scouting America's programs and publications, and the discontinuation of the Citizenship in Society merit badge that required Scouts to realize the benefits of diversity, equity, inclusion, and ethical leadership. And they've added a new military service merit badge, which will be introduced according to the Pentagon. Membership will also be based on a child's sex assigned at birth. That means any application will have only 2 sex designations, male and female, and the application must match the applicant's birth certificate. They have now used a partnership with the future service members and scouting and kids who are just trying to do good things, trying to make themselves better, trying to participate in their community. Pete Hegseth and his Pentagon, have made it a political and Christian nationalist movement to get rid of the things they hate. And that is political. And frankly, even if it's biblical, has no damn place in our government. And this is where we're at, folks. This is where we face a moment in the country where all of their weirdest fantasies they've always had of shaping American society are unfolding before our very eyes at a pace that's staggering, a staggering pace, almost impossible to track it all. We're going to need leaders that go to Washington, D.C. next year and actually investigate this stuff and make a difference, okay? And fight back against this insanity that's become all these very, very many attacks and funding attacks and corruption and grift. But this thing about DEI, this broad brush of DEI, that anything's DEI. I'm sorry, ethical leadership is DEI? Are you kidding me with this stuff? Ethical leadership is the foundation of military leadership. Not under Pete Hegseth. No, leadership under Pete Hegseth is lifting weights, going to prayer service, and doing videos in your office like a freaking influencer instead of the actual Secretary of Defense of the most powerful military in the world. This is where we're at. And when I bring it up today, because we have a great conversation ahead. As you know, on Democracy, I like to have conversations with people who are a little bit different. There's a lot going on in our country. We have a great network. 6 million subscribers now, by the way. Holy cow. Thanks, guys. So proud to be part of this network. I think when I joined Midas Touch, we had 1.6 million. So that was a lot. Now I got 6 million. So thank you for all of you joining me. But we want to talk about this education issue. Now, the scouting is an education. I was a Boy Scout. And it matters. And education in general, and these attacks on our education that accelerated dramatically in the last year in ways no one saw coming, including the experts. So, as always, I've got an expert. So we're going to talk about this week a little bit of discussion a long discussion, I think, of public education, the attacks on the public education with a constitutional law and education expert. I can't wait to get on the show. This is what we're facing, folks. This is the insidious things happening in our government, and we're responsible for stopping it. And you're responsible for voting next fall to stop it. And we can do it. With that, I'm Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy with FP Wellman, right here on the Midas Touch Network with 6 million of you guys. That's kind of cool. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Let's get on with the show. I'm excited to be here. I hope you are too. Let's go. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back. It's Fred Wellman here. Just like I was 30 seconds ago. Yeah, That's crazy, right? I mean, it never ends at DOD, and it never ends with their battle on our society, right? What we're seeing so much of this days from the Trump administration is in many ways the wet dreams, if you will. I'm not going to even pretend to say it's something less crude than that. Of all these far right extremists and others who are using Trump, let's be honest, using Trump as the opportunity to implement all their wildest fantasies of shaping our society in their bizarre ways, from Christian nationalism to whatever it may be. And so we see that with DOD right now, but more importantly, we're also seeing that with our education system. And we haven't really talked about public education in a long time. And I realized that the other day when I got a wonderful pitch from some folks, and there's some really scary things happening. And in many ways, I kind of joke it's like the final boss level of what has been a long-term effort to, in many ways, I think, dismantle public education in America. So as always, this is how it works with the show. As you know, I got the perfect guest. Derek Black is the director of the University of South Carolina's Constitutional Law Center. As a nationally recognized expert on educational law and a multi-time author, we're here to have him talk to us about public education. Let's bring Derek on the show. Hey, sir, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here, Derek.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Fred.
How's the weather in South Carolina?
Oh, we've been unusually cold here, so we've had to apologize to our visitors here recently. It's quite embarrassing, but we'll smile. I'm told it will be good in another 24 hours.
Well, that's the way it is. I'm in Missouri. It's 70 today. I can't explain it, but here we are. you know, I, I was laughing when I was getting ready for the show today. I said, this is like your moment. I mean, this is must like your moment in time as a constitutional law and educational law expert. They're crashing against each other right now in the last year, aren't they? I mean, this is kind of like your moment, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a bad way, I suppose.
Right, exactly. Not a good way.
I mean, it was crazy, particularly last spring when the executive orders started coming out. I mean, it was. I'm a professor. I'm used to living a pretty, sort of structured life, and the sort of the media calls, the requests for information. I mean, it was just constant, constant, constant. I didn't even know who I was talking to be quite honest. Half the time, I was just sort of like, just call me, and it was like whoever sort of got through, I'd pick up and talk. So yeah, it was a wild time, and even reflecting back on that, I remember 15, 20 years ago, I told my mentor from law school, I said, "Yeah, I kind of figured out that the job of academics is to just be there when the phone rings." I said, "And for most of us, the phone will never ring, but it's our job because when it rings, somebody needs to be able to give an answer." Now, I have to tell you, I never expected my phone to ring as many times as it has. So that's kind
Yeah, I mean, it's not one of those topics that usually gets is the hottest news in the country. But can you set the stage for where we are, right? It's and at least I guess as a lot of folks, I mean, when you saw me talk about a hex at the beginning here, yeah, obviously there's forces gathering around Iran. I mean, it's always something with this administration, but a lot's been happening at the Department of Education. A lot's been happening around the rules governing public education. Can you kind of set the stage of where we are in the last year, especially at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people maybe thought that folks like myself were a little bit crazy when they were worried about, public education a few years ago. In fact, the cover of my book, Schoolhouse Burning, looks very similar to your sort of burning flag. Stuff is made out of burning pencils. I thought, I don't know, it's a little bit dramatic. I actually made them even take the fire out. I'm like, the pencils can be charred, but I don't want any flames on it anyway, because I felt like maybe I was being overly dramatic. And that book came out in 2020, but I was writing it in 18 and 19. But you sort of fast forward, and it's like the things that I thought. You think that I thought it would take years to happen, happened in like 6 weeks. I mean, I had a book that I was working on, not this fall, but the fall before Trump came into office, and I was writing on this sort of, again, warning about sort of how autocracy sort of wields itself through education, and education is the sort of the last pillar of democracy, and people need to understand that. But again, I thought, it'll take Trump 4 years at least, and probably would have to be the person after him to accomplish all the designs. And then you sort of wake up and you're like in the middle of February, and you're like, holy crap, it's happened. That book is now history instead of prediction. So yeah, I mean, it is amazing. But yeah, I mean, they've totally, gutted the Department of Education, at state level, universal vouchers, book bans, etc. I mean, it's just been a constant onslaught. And I'll just sort of turn it back over to you with this. I mean, we talk about the eroding trust in institutions. Congress has been getting hammered for good reasons for a long time. The president has, the judiciary was better than them, but even now the judiciary is only at only like slightly less than half the people have faith in judiciary. Public education's always been up there in the 90s, right? But its numbers are sort of dwindling down into the 60s, and that's a dangerous place for a nonpartisan fundamental aspect of our democracy to be, the place where we all send our children. If we can't trust that, it's sort of hard for society to move forward, it seems to me.
And, I studied authoritarian movements. I've been involved in this kind of pro-democracy movement, as I call it, for a while, both professionally and on my own. I was a soldier for 20 years before that. And And it seems like in history, authoritarians always focus on education, right? Authoritarians, you can go back to Mussolini to, well, even before Mussolini, I'm sure, to Mao or whatever you want to do. Every time you have an authoritarian or people who have a certain political goal in mind, education is part of that. Education is the foundation of that. In America, we've resisted that because we're a democracy, but it does feel like in a lot of ways that's exactly what we're facing this moment, right? There's this initial, just like I talked with Pete Hicks at the beginning, like telling Boy Scouts to get rid of DEI, right? I mean, it is a direct assault on how we educate our children in a way to shape them for the future, isn't it? I mean, that's the moment we face. I mean, it's authoritarian playbook, isn't it?
Yeah, well, so there's the long game and the short game, and I think what catches most people's attention is the short game, right? When the president does something big and immediate and it affects policy and people's lives. But public education is the long game, right? You're not controlling today's adults. You're trying to sort of set up and control what adults will believe and think 20 years from now, right? And so you've got your sort of media playbook, and then you've got your public education playbook. With that said, let me be clear, right? It is appropriate for governments to reinforce their values through public education, right? Like, why else would you have it? Like, we had ours to reinforce a system of democracy, right? To sort of make good citizens, to make good decisions. So it is appropriate, but in a democracy, we have to have limits on the state's ability to impose or coerce ideas, and that's the real difference. It's not that democracies aren't sort of singing their own praises; it's that they allow people to disagree. They allow access to other information. So the only thing that really separates a democratic system of education from an autocratic one is the freedom that the people within that system have. And that's what we see, sort of limiting that freedom and instead saying, no, there's an official playbook that everyone needs to follow, or an official textbook. And that's the movement that we see happening right now.
And what are some of the highlights you've seen in the last year that are probably the most surprising and the most dangerous?
Well, the one which didn't catch a lot of attention, but I think it crystallizes the moment. So we had this sort of period of sort of anti-DEI, and there's a certain amount of noise about that one doesn't have to worry about. I mean, there's nuances about maybe what should or shouldn't be taught. We can have a long conversation about that.
Right.
But there was this moment, I think it was in late March, early April, in which the president sent out a form to every single local superintendent and every state superintendent in the United States of America, and required them to sign this document attesting that they, I'll just say, won't do DEI. And again, the question isn't whether DEI is good or bad. What I point out to people is that for the very first time in the history of this country, one single individual claimed to have the power to dictate what would happen in every American classroom. That has never happened in American history. And so again, it doesn't matter whether the idea was good or bad. The question is, should that power reside in one person? And no one ever dared take that step before, but this president did dare take that step, about half a year ago.
That makes a lot of sense. And the other challenge I think we too is DEI is kind of anything they want it to be, right? I mean, that it would be cute, it would be it's bad enough they're doing it, but they don't seem to understand that. That's why I was kind of highlighting that opening piece, right? About what is DEI? I mean, take away certain merit badges because they don't like it is what we're seeing though is it's not just that they're not saying a specific thing. The danger, I think, for me too, is that's not a very specific thing. What is DEI? And you've seen we have seen like local, I've got kids in school, I've seen local school districts interpret that different ways, right? I mean, it's like here in our district that I resided, they got rid of that much of St. Louis is still under a desegregation ruling. That's for decades. It was one of the first ones after Brown v. Education. And that means that black students are bused to what are predominantly white schools in the county are allowed to, on and on. And some school districts had whole programs to help those young black students, those black students from the city, better acclimate and better survive in a different environment from what they've grown up in, what they live in currently. That was interpreted as DEI, just supporting students of color in any way whatsoever. And those people were fired and finding. I mean, that I think does that worry you as especially as a lawyer, right? A constitutional law. I mean, that's a pretty broad brush, right? I mean, it's dangerous in that way too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things going on there. I mean, we just got to start with like public school teachers and principals are not lawyers, right? And so
Right.
their ability to sort of say, well, what can I do or cannot? I mean, even with
Right.
clear language, it's like, well, it might be clear to an attorney. Is it clear to the principal, right? So you're sort of putting them in this position where they just say, I just don't want to get in trouble, right? So they sort of
Right.
move in an opposite direction. But then there's the sort of the First Amendment piece of it, even if you are an attorney, which I think is getting to your point, Fred, is and there have been some positive developments in the federal courts on this, which is, look, when you're going to restrict speech, you need to be clear about it, because if you're not clear about it, what you end up doing is also restricting speech that's entirely protected because
Chilling.
you
It's a
scare
chilling effect.
the
Yeah, it's a chilling effect.
so you have that sort of huge problem there. But then there's a third problem, and you really saw this happening at Columbia University and Harvard, and I think you cannot disentangle that from K through 12, which is normally when there is discrimination complaints against a school district. I shouldn't say normally, always when there's a discrimination complaint in school districts, you file it with the department, they investigate it, they issue formal factual findings. The district is then allowed to say, yeah, that's right, that's wrong, you missed something. They can contest or not contest. If they say, no, okay, you caught me, then we go into this process in which we try to negotiate what the remedy is going to be. And what the statute says is that funding shall only be cut off in those instances when voluntary compliance cannot be secured. Right. So cutting off funding is something that normally would take a year, right? Investigation
Sure.
normally takes 6 months and negotiations might take several other months. And so the earliest scenario in which you get to the point in which you turn off funding is, a year or so. Well, guess what? Columbia got a letter on Monday, and their funds were cut off by Friday, right? No investigation. When we say funds, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. No, that I'm aware of, no factual findings, no claim by Columbia that they would refuse to address the problems if there were problems. It was just like, great, go straight to jail, do not pass go type of situation. And so if you're a school district and you don't have fancy lawyers, you don't have the endowment
Yeah.
of, Columbia, and you go, look, the president or the administration is coming for me and they're going to make a gut instinct decision contrary to due process in a few days. What else am I going to do besides say yes to whatever they want, because I've got kids who need lunch, and these federal dollars provide lunch for these kids. And so the power differential is enormous, and this administration has shown that it is willing to exercise that, even though the law prohibits it.
It's just so let's that's a perfect way to stick an ad break because I want to circle back in the next phase of this, and that's talk about that law and talk about what Congress's role in all of this. A theme I use a lot in the show here and in my other life that I lead is that Congress has all but abandoned their duty of oversight of statutory, oversight and the laws that they themselves passed, and they've all but walked away from any oversight responsibility at this moment. So let's take a break, pause. We've got as always, we have a great sponsor on the show, and then you'll come back. We'll talk about that side of this thing. Thanks for joining us. I travel a lot in my job, both in planes and driving around a lot lately. And the big problem I always run into is I'm uncomfortable. And it sounds funny, but just the clothes are uncomfortable. Airline seats are tiny, right? And I want to be able to look good while I'm traveling because I'm a professional and also look good when I get there. But I just truly want to be comfortable and make it easy. And that's why I really enjoy Mack Weldon. Mack Weldon's been a big part of my late style these days. We give up comfort every day, and I don't want to let style be another reason to give up comfort. And that's where Mack Weldon's new Ace collection makes it effortless to put together I'll truly feeling comfortable while I'm traveling or working or driving around my district. Their new Ace line is inspired by their best line of sweatpants. It combines everyday comfort with long lasting, confident looks. And you can upgrade your collection for the new year and all year with the bomber jackets, just hats, of sweats. I mean, everything you can think of at macweldon.com. And by the way, right now you can get 20% off your first order by using my code FRED. Okay. So I like Mack Weldon because it fits my style and it's comfortable. Now I'm on the road a lot and I have to wear clothes that can fit in multiple rooms, but look clean, professional, and stylish while I do it. And Mack Weldon nails it without even trying. I've tried a lot of brands, okay? I really have. And the Ace line just makes my life easier and comfortable and put together even when I'm busy. So I've added comfort and flair to all of my layers this year as we go through the winter. I'm adding more as we go into the spring because I have to look comfortable and cool while getting around. So Macwell balances classic pieces with updated details to keep you looking sharp all the time. It's not flashy, it's classic like me. It's always a style. It's made from the best and most comfortable materials you can imagine. It's very easy to put together your style. I kind of like that part. I'm a simple guy. I don't want to overthink things, and you don't have to think about it with Mack Weldon. It's effortless by design. The Ace line is ease, it's self-assurance. It's never been more comfortable to do it. So the go-to choice for guys who want to look great without even trying is Mack Weldon. So they're designed to fit you and me and their regular clothes with comfort and style. And for over 10 years, Mack Weldon has designed timeless, innovative menswear to help you move through the day with confidence, even if you're just hanging out in your underwear or your sweatpants at home after a very long day. So Mack Weldon's Ace collection, comfortable anywhere. Just go to macweldon.com and get 20% off your first order of $125 or more with promo code FRED. That's Mack Weldon, MACKWELDON.com, and you use code FRED for 25% off your first order. I can't recommend enough. Comfortable, stylish, classic. Thanks so much for sponsoring our show. And we're back. So, as we were saying before the break there, Derek, I mean, what strikes me a lot as I've been doing this for a while now in the last year is how Congress has all but abandoned their role in all this, right? It's like I don't think I've seen a story, frankly, between the two of us and the 2,000 people watching. I don't think I've seen Congress utter a peep of seems like of fighting back, at least the Republican Congress, on these attacks on Department of Education. There's oversight committee. Are you seeing Congress seems to have abandoned their role completely and allowing Linda McMahon of all people, who's the Department of Education secretary, who's to do what they want. Are you seeing any kind of? I mean, the failure field. There's a big failure there too, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's start with the secretaries because that's where Congress first gets involved.
Sure.
Right? You go back to the first administration. I mean,
Yeah.
Betsy DeVos was the first
Right.
appointee ever appointed that required the vice president to cast a tie-breaking vote. And to be clear, we had quote unquote MAGA voters here in the state of South Carolina. In fact, thousands of them signed a petition insisting that our state senator, our U.S. senator, meet with them because they did not understand how he could vote yes on Betsy DeVos. Right.
Wow.
And so what you see is actually an extreme level of, I would actually not just partisanship, illegitimacy, right? At the very are actually saying, hey, we voted for you, but we don't like her, right? Why won't you take our phone call? So so we've got people that really don't have any business leading these institutions. So that's
Sure.
number one. So Congress won't even step up there. And then, you're right on the statutory end of things that Congress has not exercised its oversight. With that said, I mean, I want to give Congress some credit, which is, look, the administration wanted to substantially reduce federal funding for public education this year. And guess what? Congress said no. They kept every single line item steady, if not increased, except for one very, very small, and they cut back just a little bit. And that wasn't the one the president was worried about. So
Yeah.
it's this sort of subtle rebuke. You're right. They're not doing anything to restrain the structural changes of the administration, but they're also refusing to change the way that they fund schools. So I do think there is that, but it's not new to this Congress. Let me say, I've got a paper coming out in the Yale Law Journal that it's really right on your point. It talks about, look, Congress set up a system that governs the way the federal government and the states interact with each other in education. And it's built on an idea of federalism, that the federal government can't dictate to states, right? If there's anything that the Republicans normally unify around, it's the federal government dictate to the states on public education.
Yeah.
What I say in this article is, Trump may be the worst, but he's not the first. That actually this
Mhm.
problem of using the department to overstretch and let the president decide what's going to happen in education is actually one that goes back to the Obama administration. I mean, I actually testified in a case against the Obama administration, saying, "Hey, I'm not saying your policies are bad policies. You just don't have authority to impose them." And to be clear, I was a member of the Obama Biden transition team, so it's not like I'm some, you know, you know, random person. So yeah, I just said, look, there's got to be guardrails, and Congress set them in the statute, and you're running roughshod on them. What's surprising, well, maybe not surprising, is that Congress doesn't mind that this president is running roughshod. When Obama did it, actually, there was bipartisan legislation passed and voted. I think it was like 87% of Congress approved of it, that actually substantially restricted the power of the Secretary of Education. That was in
Yeah.
the waning months of 2014, I think it was.
Yeah. And you mentioned in our conversation before the show started that this didn't just happen today. There's been years in the making of this moment where the dismantling of public schools, and there is blame on both sides, unfortunately. It's just how it is that we've gotten to this point now. But it has accelerated in the last year. I mean, I mean, how do we wind? I mean, honestly, it's like trying to put something back in the can again, right? It's not that easy, is it? I mean, unwinding all of this is not going to be easy. They've had some losses lately, though, right? I mean, we've had some significant court cases that set them back quite a bit, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean,
The DEI stuff.
yeah, I mean, they abandoned the DEI dear colleague letter, which is a good thing. They abandoned it, but they still have the capacity to sort of prosecute on an individual basis. I mean, it's a good thing, but yet it doesn't sort of solve the problem.
Right.
The Supreme Court didn't say it's okay for the president to dismantle the department, but said it was too soon for the lower courts to get involved. So there's still a lot hanging out there. But in terms of the road of how we got here, I mean, look, the first thing I would say is, like, we've got 2 centuries of this nation being fully committed to public education, that it being a cornerstone of our democracy. I mean, I won't go through all the details, but it's like, it is a fundamental part of our democracy. A lot of people say public education is the 4th branch of government.
I agree.
Yeah. And so, and there's, it's always been very, bipartisan, as I've pointed out. I mean, I just said, even even during the Obama administration, when Congress couldn't agree with the president on the color of the sky, 85% of Congress rewrote the Every Student Succeeds Act, right? And so there's always been bipartisan agreement. And what has shifted, unfortunately, in the last 4 or 5 years, is that bipartisan consensus is broken. I mean, also say, even during the first Trump administration, Betsy DeVos spent 4 years trying to convince Congress to expand vouchers. And even the Republicans said, we're not interested in that. Our voters, our rural voters, they love their public schools. No way, no how are we signing on to that.
Yeah.
After January 6th, vouchers became a litmus test for the Republican Party. And what we had, and you see this in the state legislatures, tons the reason why vouchers failed for 4 straight years in Texas was not because of Democrats. It was because of rural Republicans. The reason why they were failing in Tennessee was not because of Democrats. It was because of rural Republicans. I could carry this on and on and on and on.
Right.
What's happened since then is that a handful of billionaires said, I like vouchers, and I'm going to give Greg Abbott however much money he needs to go in and primary every single rural Republican who doesn't favor vouchers. So it's not okay to be an elected Republican anymore if you don't support vouchers. And it's not because of the people, it's because of the money in politics. And so that's one thing that ruptures us. But I'll have to say, on the other side of this DEI, I don't think it was all wrong. I don't think there was some vast woke conspiracy. None of that.
No.
But I have begun to reflect on, did we commit any unforced errors? And I do think that maybe we got a little overzealous at times, right? If this is a 4th branch, a nonpartisan fundamental aspect of society that all children go to, we can't run ahead of parents. It doesn't say that parents get to decide everything, but that these schools operate on trust and consensus and democratic legitimacy. And so, if educators begin doing things that get ahead of where the public is without their input, I mean, that's a problem. That's a problem. And again, it's not to say that, the values were wrong, But there was. I mean, look, I've got kids in school. I'm education law expert. I mean, I do think that what the left did was to take the rigid ideology on the other side as a justification for them sometimes taking a really rigid ideology. And that might be okay in the halls of Congress. It's not okay in schools.
Yeah, it's this big pendulum. And we have a very wide audience to go. That's very interesting. So what's next in this battle? As you sit here, you've seen a couple of these court cases. What should all our viewers be looking for, and how can they make a difference? I mean, anyway, what's next in the battle as they try to stop this dismantling of our education system?
Well, I mean, I think I know that right now what's happening is as part of the big beautiful bill that passed this past summer, is that the administration put in what is called vouchers nationwide. Well, guess what? You know, most states don't want vouchers, and they've said no. Massachusetts doesn't want them. Michigan doesn't. All these states, California doesn't have them. Colorado doesn't have them. We've got state constitutions that actually prohibit vouchers. So, we've got some deep red states that have them, but in this new bill, it's expanding a voucher to states where the publicly elected officials have said no to vouchers. And now the way it operates is governors have the sort of option of, I mean, in this part, the bill was at least somewhat considered. It says, look, we'll leave it up to the governors to decide whether their people can accept these vouchers. And so governors are in a tough position right now. And some of them are going, well, it's free money. How can I say no to free federal money? Even though the people are against this. And so I think that's the big turning point, because there's the potential that, I mean, there's a couple of states that have said no, but that this big, beautiful bill, so to speak, expands vouchers nationwide and changes the nature of the playing field, even in states where people don't want them. And so I think that's a danger point. Obviously, we're struggling with censorship in a lot of states. We're struggling with civic education, right? I mean, there is bipartisan agreement that we need to do a better job preparing our young people to actively participate in our democracy.
Yeah.
The problem is the fights and the grandstanding over how best to do that. I mean, I think actually reasonable people, and I'm naive, I think reasonable people of all political stripes can get in a room and go, hey, we're not trying to score points. What all we ought to do here, to prepare kids for democracy. I think we could come up with that. But when the cameras roll and you're right up next election, things get muddy. So we're having trouble moving forward on an agenda in which there is bipartisan agreement that we need to move forward on that. But you know what? Hey, you could say the same thing about immigration reform back in the Bush administration. Here we still are without legislation. We haven't changed our immigration laws in, I don't know, 40, 50 years now or something like that. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about this. I mean, it is a priority. I mean, the thing is, there's very few issues, as I travel my area, there's very few issues that touch as many people as jobs, health insurance, healthcare, education. It is, as you said, there's a reason rural Republicans are against it, because there aren't any private schools. There just isn't. I mean, there aren't any private. I live in Missouri. Large swaths. I mean, the two big, the metropolitan areas, the two major metropolitan have quite a few. Mine does. St. Louis has a lot of private schools, but for the most part, if you're anywhere outside the major metropolitan areas, good luck. There is no private school. Even your public school is far away. And so, in many ways, all this seems to be nothing more than an underhanded way to dismantle public schooling. And then you see the little subtle things like Arkansas rolling back the age for kids to work. We see here in Missouri where they're actually trying to pass a law for a lower minimum wage for kids that are underage. So Lily, and it's just, it seems, for those who are paranoid, even me, an insidious effort to get more people into the work, more drones into the working, right, the factories, if you will, than anything else. I mean, it almost feels like they're winding the clock back on our country in a way that is so shockingly scary to me. I mean, do you ever have those moments you're like, you studied history, you have those moments like, this feels awfully bad compared to, feels like a bad time in our country.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had, I mean, my book Dangerous Learning sort of looks at the history of the attacks on Black education and Black literacy, right? It was most people assume actually that it was always criminal for enslaved people to read and write.
Right.
That's not actually true. I mean, actually, there were schools for black children, including enslaved black children in the late
Yeah.
1700s and early 1800s. And it's really in the 1830s in which they go, look, this education thing is a problem because these enslaved people and free people of color, they're leveraging it for freedom. And so it's at that point in the 30s, they began to criminalize it. And so, you see I won't go through the whole history, but you see these sort of moments where kind of ignore education, but then when anxieties run high about, justice or changes in the economy, then they begin to tinker with it or do more than just tinker with it. And so, yeah, I mean, I see this sort of part of me that goes, notwithstanding my concerns about some overreach, as I said earlier. I mean, you did see after George Floyd that our public schools said, well, if the rest of the society, we don't know what the rest of the society is going to do to address um, racial injustice. We don't know what the rest of the society is going to do to create equal opportunity. But doggone it, we can do more than what we've been doing. And I'm
Right.
not saying that everything they did was right, but you did have this of teachers. Some of our our best public servants said, let's try to make a difference.
Yep.
And it's when they tried to make and again, whether they did it right or wrong, beside the point, they tried to make a difference. That's when you see this sort of huge backlash, right, against it.
Zoo.
No, we're not, we were not pushing further towards justice. That sort of fear
No.
that public education was going to make a difference, and so there was a huge backlash. But I just want to grab one point you were saying about the rural communities because it gets missed by the urbanites and the elites, and I always like to say this, which is, you know, we've got rural communities whose public schools have struggled for decades for a variety of reasons, and I always say to them, I was like, if you haven't seen a new brick laid in your community in the last decade, if you haven't seen a new bus purchased in the last decade in your community, if you haven't seen a fully staffed and fully credentialed teaching force in your community, and you look at the state house and you see them falling all over themselves to pass vouchers, you should be red hot, piping mad because they clearly don't care about you. They do not care. Because if they did, they'd be addressing those bricks. If they did, they'd be addressing those school buses and those houses. And they're not. They're not. And it's easy, I think, for people to go, those vouchers, they don't have anything to do with me. I'm in a rural community. It does have something to do because they're prioritizing something else over you. And that's what you see here. And they're prioritizing it not because it's going to make society better. They're prioritizing it because it's just ideology. It's just ideology.
Oh, that's a great place to finish. I couldn't agree more. And it's a constant battle. I'm very blessed to have friends who are fighting this battle, like Jess Piper and others are just really battling. But I drive my region, my district, and I see that. I see schools that are clearly dated and haven't been updated since the 70s at best. And meanwhile, our state house here in Missouri is gutting the system, gutting it. And it is political. It is for the well off. There really are billionaires funding the whole thing. And getting themselves tax breaks, and just every day gets worse. So, well, thanks for fighting the good fight. Where can folks find you? Where can they find your book?
Well, you can find the book anywhere you want to on the internet. I used to hang around on social media, but I have to say I've just gotten a little bit saner on not getting there. So I think, tend to see me fall back on places like this where we can have a good therapeutic conversation
All right.
on newspapers. Yeah.
That's a good. I'm not sure that's not a bad call. I sure is. As someone who does it for a living in many ways, there's an integral part of my job, if you will. I think the sanity is a good idea. Well, thanks so much, Derek. I appreciate you joining us. It's a great conversation, educational as hell, and I do appreciate that. I guess, keep up the good fight. I mean, it is so important to our nation. It is really the fourth branch, and I appreciate you giving us an update and telling us so much about it. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh, what a great conversation. I learned, I love the show when I learn things, and I learned a lot today, and it is a good point. And I love where we finished. The fact is, I here in Missouri, I live in a super majority Republican state for 23 years. They are dismantling public education. I don't know if that's their mission. I mean, sometimes I think, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you say, well, they've been doing this for decades. So clearly it's their mission is dismantle it. I'm not necessarily sure if it's that laid out. I'm not sure if somebody said, hey, let's destroy public schools. I do think people said, I want get tax dollars to help me pay for private school. I do think people want to have education that fits only their political perspectives and their sometimes racial and bigoted perspectives and their, of course, extreme religious perspectives, as we see with our friend Mr. Hegseth, who moved to Tennessee to put his kids in very specific schools related to his church. So we do see that insidious nature of those who have decided that public education isn't for them. And in their efforts to get just what they want, they're going to destroy it for the rest of us. And that's un-American. That's the un-American part. Study after study finds the voucher systems, almost 90% of the time, vouchers go to people who are already in private school. The myth that they help kids who can't afford private school go to private school is completely untrue. It's completely biased and fake. And what happens too, the private schools raise their rates anyway. It's a profit machine using your tax dollars to take care of private schools and parochial schools. And the worst part for me, and this week we had a big issue with disability funding here in Missouri, which I won't go into great detail. But what bothers me is if you look at this, there's no oversight of these schools. They do not have to accept a child with disabilities. They just don't. And so what happens to our children who need help? I'm enough of I grew up in the Christian faith, the Catholic faith, that said that we are judged as a society by how we treat the least of us. And for me, as I watch this unfold in the public school system right now and the education battle and what's happening in Washington and at our state houses and at the local school boards, is we are not doing that. How will we be judged as a nation and society someday when history looks back at us and discovers that we decided those in need with disabilities, those in need because of poverty, those in need because of loss or learning disabilities were simply discarded? Who are we as a nation? Ask yourself that question. Ask that of your representatives. They deserve to answer you. You want answers from your representatives. Ask them very directly. How do you look in the mirror knowing that you are perpetuating a system that is destroying the least amongst us? The least. So with that, thanks for joining us another week here on Democracy FP Wellman. I appreciate you joining us as always. A lot of stuff going on. Be sure to check out our Substack, fpwellman.substack.com. Of course, everywhere I am is FP Wellman or FP Wellman Official, depending on the channel. But go to our Substack, especially for the latest and all the cool things we're doing. There's a lot of cool things going on right now. As you know, I have that other job I'm doing at the same time. So then I just appreciate you guys being here, being part of this. This is a show every week. We're still getting going. We got more hot seats being filmed next week. We'll be introduce you a lot more really cool candidates from around the country. I've had some great conversations this week with other candidates who are running for office. You're going to meet them here. Again, I'm Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy FP Wellman. Join us every week right here on Midas Touch at 7 p.m. on Fridays. You guys have a great week. And remember, we're not done yet.